Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a nice idea if everyone can leave a comment and let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. It was near the end of the season, late fall, just before the first real snow. I'd been working the backcountry trails for almost 6 years, and by then I knew the patterns. People rush to get one last trip in before winter hits, and more than a few of them overestimate themselves. That's when mistakes happen. I was out checking a trail network in a more remote section of the park. No cell coverage, no traffic, no cabins. Just a few markers and your own feet to kick you out. I was supposed to clear some debris from a rockfall and make sure the posted closures were still up after the last storm. I found the notebook near a fork in the trail about 10 miles from the nearest access point. It wasn't buried or hidden, just lying near a stump like someone had dropped it while sitting down. Weather had gotten to it a bit, pages wrinkled and the edges a little warped, but still readable. It was one of those spiral-bound types with a blue plastic cover. No name on the front. Just scuffed from use. The first few pages were normal. Notes on the hike, food packed, trail conditions, small sketches of trees and birds. The writing was neat at the start. Then the tone shifted. There was an entry from a day that said something like, "Twisted my ankle bad today. Tripped over a root I didn't see. Swelled up fast. Hurts to move. Might rest here tomorrow. I think I have enough food." After that, the handwriting started to look worse. Sloppier, bigger letters. Some of it written sideways on the page like they were just trying to get thoughts down. The next few pages were hard to read. Talk about pain, being cold at night, hearing things that weren't there, branches snapping, movement in the brush, distant voices. Then it got worse. They wrote they tried to crawl back toward the trail but kept getting turned around. They wrote about leaving marks on trees to know the way, but then not seeing them the next day. They thought maybe animals rubbed them off. I remember one line exactly. "I keep going in circles. The trees are the same. I wake up and I'm where I started." I stopped there for a while, trying to figure out what they were talking about. If they were off the trail, they couldn't have gone far with a bad leg. I marked the spot on my GPS, then packed the notebook away. There wasn't any mention of a name yet, but I made a note to check missing persons reports once I got back. A few more pages in, the entries started coming hours apart. Shorter. Almost like a log of time. Morning. Still here. Can't move. Then later on the same page, heard footsteps. I yelled. No one came. Then, I don't know how many days it's been. My leg is purple. I think it's broken. I saw someone through the trees, but they didn't stop. I screamed. They looked right at me and kept walking. That one hit me wrong. I remember setting the notebook down and standing up, looking into the woods around me. Nothing but dry leaves and dead air. The wind had died down earlier, and everything felt real still. I checked the area, widened my search about 50 feet in every direction. I didn't find anything. No deer. No signs of a camp or a fire. Just old moss, pine needles, and the feeling of being watched. I kept reading once I got back to the station. Near the back of the notebook, the pages had dirt on them. One had a reddish smear. The words were hard to make out. There were entries about someone following them. Not in the beginning, but after the injury. After they yelled for help. They wrote about someone walking behind them, always just out of view. Not an animal. said they saw them once, standing still between two trees. Too far to see a face, but close enough to see skin. There was a note after that. They come at night. They don't speak. That part didn't make sense to me. I thought maybe they were delirious. Pain, cold, hunger, fear, it messes with people. I've seen it before. The last full entry was 3 lines. I hear breathing when I sleep. It's not mine. I'm not alone out here. I don't think they'll let me leave. There were a few marks after that. Scribbles. Lines like they tried to write something but couldn't finish. Then nothing. I reported it. We launched a search based on the GPS coordinates from where I found the notebook. Sent a team of 5 with dogs. The terrain wasn't easy, lots of deadfall and thick brush. Took us most of the next day. We found the body less than a quarter mile from the trail. They were under a kind of shallow lean-to made from branches and bark. Not one you build for shelter. More like someone tried to cover the body after the fact. The leg was broken, just like they wrote. Old break, already turning black. Looked like infection set in. No food left in the pack. No water bottle. Hands were dirty, fingertips red and cracked. The weirdest part was that there were fresh tracks around the area. Not animals. Boots. One of the dogs kept pacing a spot behind the lean-to. Wouldn't stop. We found a pair of socks there, folded up and dry. Not the kind the hiker was wearing in any of the photos. Different color, newer. Fresh. No prints nearby besides ours. And no one else was supposed to be in the area. We logged it. Bagged everything. Body was airlifted out later that week. Turned out they were reported missing 2 weeks before I found the notebook. They'd gone in alone, like most do. No GPS beacon. Left a note with their roommate saying they'd be back in 4 days. I think about one entry a lot. The one where they said they saw someone looking at them, but they didn't stop to help. We assumed that was just a stress reaction, but the tracks near the body made that harder to ignore. Someone had been there. After the notebook was left. After the hiker died. We never found who it was. No one else logged a hike in that area. No one matched the boot prints. No reports. No signs. Just that folded pair of socks and a dead hiker who thought they were being followed. Who maybe was followed. I started carrying a sidearm after that, even though I never had before. Most rangers don't out here. But now I keep it close. I also don't go alone anymore, not out that far. Not without backup. I've been back to that trail once since then, and I didn't stay long. Something about that place feels wrong now. Off, like the woods are waiting for you to stop paying attention. Like something out there wants you to get hurt. Not to kill you. Just to slow you down. Long enough for something else to find you first. It was late September when I came across the camp. Still warm during the day but cold at night, the kind of weather where the air smells sharp in the morning. I was doing my last long sweep of the season before the trail started to close. This was up in a far reach of the park. Not marked for tourists. No cell signal. One way in, same way out. I had done this route before but never seen anyone up there. I wasn't looking for anything, just checking signs and making sure trees hadn't fallen over the narrow paths. About 7 miles from the access point, I started noticing small things. A fresh boot print, still crisp around the edges. A torn corner of plastic food wrap snagged on a branch. A beer can near a rock outcrop. I didn't think much of it. People sneak out there sometimes. They're not supposed to, but it happens. Usually I find a fire ring, some trash, then nothing. This time was different. I found the camp down in a little hollow past a dry stream bed. You couldn't see it from the trail. I only found it because I was checking a side path for erosion and spotted a bit of orange like a jacket or tarp through the trees. The tent was still standing, zipped halfway up. I called out before I got close. No answer. The fire pit had ash in it, still warm underneath. I moved one of the logs and found a half-burned child sneaker, small, like toddler size. Just sitting there, melted on one side. I stood up and looked around more. There were 2 camp chairs. One knocked over. A cooler with the lid open and food inside, not even spoiled yet. A pan still on a flat rock with what looked like half-cooked sausage. I checked the pan, still a bit warm. That's how I knew it was recent. Hours, not days. The air smelled like meat and wood smoke and something else I couldn't place. There were clothes too. A man's jacket on the ground. A pink hoodie balled up under the edge of the tent. A little plastic doll missing an arm. The whole scene felt wrong. Not like people left in a rush. More like they had no choice. I radioed it in, but I didn't get a reply. Not unusual out there. No coverage unless you climb high. I marked the GPS and started photographing everything. I didn't touch much. Just enough to see there was no blood, no signs of struggle. No wallet, no phones. I looked through the trees, walked a few hundred feet in every direction. Nothing. No trails. No drag marks. No broken branches. Just silence. I stayed until sundown. I had this pressure in my chest I couldn't explain. Like something heavy was nearby, but I couldn't see it. I kept turning around expecting to find someone watching. I never did. I hiked back in the dark. Didn't stop. I felt stupid later, but I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside my window made me sit up. I waited for the missing persons reports. A man and a child, maybe a woman too. But nothing came. No cars in the lot. No license plates to track. It was like they vanished and no one cared. I kept checking for days. Then weeks. Still nothing. The higher-ups told me to close the file. Probably illegal campers who got scared off. Happens more than you'd think. But that didn't sit right. No one leaves food still warm. No one leaves a child's shoe in the fire pit. Winter came and buried the site. I didn't go back until spring. I took a new guy with me, said we were checking storm damage. He didn't know the story. We found the camp again. Snow had flattened it. The tent was collapsed, half covered in dirt. Animals had been through everything. But the fire pit was still there. I found the shoe buried in ash. Still smelled like burned plastic. I told myself I'd drop it for good after that. And I did, until late summer, when I started seeing weird things again. A plastic wrapper near a tree. Boot prints that didn't match park staff. A strip of blue tape on a branch, bright, like survey tape, but we hadn't marked that section. I started keeping track. Dates, places, times. I checked the trail cams. Most of them just showed deer, wind, the usual. But one camera, an old one up on a ridge, caught something. It was aimed down at the main trail. You could see a man standing just off the path, facing the trees. Not walking. Just standing there. No pack. No gear. Just still. The timestamp was 3:18 in the morning. The man stayed in that same spot for almost an hour. Then the camera glitched and skipped 10 minutes. When it came back, he was gone. I reported it again. Got the usual response. Could be anything. Glitch in the feed. Old footage. Mislabeling. But the feed was live. And the timestamp matched when I was camped not far from there. I didn't sleep much that night either. About a month later, I found the bunker. I was about 5 miles from the old campsite, on a section we almost never patrol. Steep, overgrown, nothing but game trails. I only went that way because a hiker reported a bad smell near a fallen log. Said it might be a dead animal. I brought gloves, figured I'd drag whatever it was off the trail. The smell was there, but it wasn't just rot. It was sour, like old sweat and mildew. I followed it past the log and into a thicket. That's when I saw a square patch of ground that didn't look right. The leaves were too flat. No new growth. I scraped some back and hit metal. There was a handle bolted into it. A hatch covered in dirt and branches. I stepped back, looked around, waited. Nothing moved. I opened it slow. Hinges groaned. Cold air came up. I shined my flashlight down and saw stairs made of wood and metal. Steep, narrow. The smell hit harder then. I gagged but went down anyway. I don't know why. I should have radioed it in first. I didn't. The walls were wood paneling. Damp. Mold in the corners. There were shelves with canned food, all expired. A sleeping bag rolled out on a cot. A lantern. A jug of water half empty. And on the far wall, a camera. Mounted to a bracket. Wired into a battery setup. It was pointed through a small hole in the wall. When I looked through it, I could see the trail. Clear as day. It was aimed right where I had passed last week. The camera was on. Light blinking. I turned around and climbed out. I marked the location and sealed the hatch the way I found it. Back at the station, I filed the report. The sheriff's office came out the next day. They took everything. Cleared it. Closed it off. Said it was old. Left over from a hunter or someone squatting. I asked about the camera. They said it had no footage. The hard drive was missing. They didn't find prints. No DNA. No proof anyone had been living there recently. But I know someone was. The food wasn't dusty. The sleeping bag was warm. Someone had been watching. For a while. Maybe since last year. I don't patrol that area anymore. I asked to be reassigned. They gave me the river trails. Busier, louder, safer. I still think about that shoe in the fire pit. How small it was. How the food was still hot. How no one ever came looking. Like they were never meant to leave. It was late in the season. Cold enough in the mornings to see your breath, but the ground was still dry. I had been hearing from some of the other rangers about signs of poaching near the north boundary. That site isn't marked on the maps we give out. The brush is too thick, terrain uneven, and the only people that go out there are the ones that aren't supposed to. It's mostly private land past that point, but the lines blur up there. No fences. No cameras. just tree after tree. I went out alone that morning, took the trail that cuts off after marker 72, followed a ridge for about a mile. I started seeing what looked like drag marks in the dirt. Not from boots, whiter, like something heavy had been pulled. I stopped and looked around. There were no boot prints nearby, no blood, just that one long trail of disturbed leaves that disappeared over a slope. That's where I made the first mistake. I followed it. Downhill was steep. I had to hold onto tree trunks to keep from sliding. I took slow steps and scanned ahead. It was quiet. No birds. No wind. Just dry leaves crunching under my boots. About halfway down, I noticed a stick prop between two rocks that didn't belong there. Straight and clean cut. Looked placed. I bent down to move it, and the ground gave out. I didn't have time to yell. The dirt collapsed under me and I fell straight down. Maybe 12 feet. Hard bottom. Flat. I hit on my left side, hard enough that my ears rang and I saw white. When the pain came, it was all at once. My leg, my ribs, my shoulder. I tried to move and couldn't. The pit was narrow, dug clean, packed on the sides with boards and lined with tarp. No way to climb out. The top was covered in a kind of net, thin branches and leaf litter over a frame. From above it would have looked like nothing. I laid there for a long time. I don't know how long. The light didn't reach all the way down. Just enough to see shapes. My radio was above me. It had come off in the fall. I saw it lying just out of reach, maybe 2 feet up the slope near the edge, caught in a root. I didn't yell. I should have, but I didn't. I just laid there, breathing slow, listening. I knew what kind of trap I had fallen into. It wasn't for deer. Too deep. Too well made. This was for something larger. Maybe bear. Maybe cougar. Maybe people. The realization came slow, but it stayed. The person who dug this meant for whatever fell in to stay in. I don't know how long I was down there before I heard steps. Slow. Crunching over leaves, getting closer. I held my breath. The steps stopped right above me. I couldn't see their face, just the outline of shoulders, arms. They stood at the edge. Didn't speak. Didn't move. I kept quiet. I don't know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe I didn't want them to know I was awake. Either way, I stayed still. They knelt down after a minute. I heard something metal. A clink. Then more rustling. They dragged something across the cover and reset it. I heard the net being adjusted. Leaves replaced. Like nothing had happened. They never said a word. Just worked quiet and steady. Then they walked off. The steps faded until they were gone. I waited until it was almost dark before I tried to move. My leg wasn't broken, but it wasn't right either. I used my belt to keep it straight. Every movement was slow and sharp. I tried to climb, but the sides were too smooth. The boards were slick with dirt and damp. I scraped my hands raw trying. No grip. I gave up and stayed still through the night. It got cold. I pressed against the side of the pit to keep warm. I slept in bits. Woke up every time I heard a sound. Once it was something walking past above. Could have been a raccoon. Could have been them again. I didn't call out. Next morning, the light came down stronger. I saw a bone in the corner of the pit. Looked like a femur. Not human, but big. Old. Cracked at the end like it had been chewed. I looked around more. Saw wire loop near the base of the boards, like it had been part of a snare or used to tie something down. There was hair stuck to it. Not animal. Black. Short. By the middle of the day, I started thinking I wasn't going to make it out. My leg was swollen. I had nothing to eat. My canteen was half full, but I knew it wouldn't last long. The smell of dirt and rot was thick at the bottom. Like something had died there before. Probably had. That afternoon, the steps came back. Same as before. Slow. Deliberate. They stopped at the edge. I kept still. This time they didn't kneel. They just stood. Then a small rock dropped in. Hit near my foot. Not a random fall. It was thrown. I didn't move. Another one followed. Hit my arm. Still, I stayed still. Then they left. Again. By the third day, I knew I had to try again. I dug into the dirt with a piece of bone, made small holes to wedge my fingers. Got maybe 2 feet up before my leg gave out and I slid back down. Tore the skin off both palms. I screamed that time. Not loud, but enough to hear it echo. Later that evening, I heard something drop from above. Not a rock. Heavier. I looked and saw a rope. It hung down but didn't reach all the way. Just dangled a few feet short. It was tied to something. I couldn't see what. There was no voice. No movement. Just the rope swaying. Then I heard something metal again. A snap. Like a latch or clip. Then the rope jerked back up and vanished. I didn't sleep after that. Every few minutes I looked up, expecting to see someone peering down. But no one came. Day 4, I got lucky. One of the younger rangers, Mike, had been sent out to check on me. I hadn't reported him since I left. He followed my usual path, saw the fresh boot prints I had left, and the disturbed slope where I had slid down. He almost fell in himself. I heard him call my name from above and I almost cried. They got me out with a rope harness. I passed out halfway up. Woke up in the hospital with a fever and a busted ankle. The doctor said another day or 2 and the infection would have set in bad. I told the others what I saw. The trap. The steps. The rocks. The rope. They went back out with a team the next morning. The pit was gone. Filled in. No boards, no tarp, no signs. Just loose dirt. Whoever made it came back after I got out. Cleaned everything. Like it was never there. They never found who did it. No prints. No deer. Nothing. Just forest and silence. I don't work that boundary anymore. I asked for a desk job for a while. I still think about the rocks. How they didn't say a word. Just stood there and waited. Like they were deciding. Like they had done it before. Like they would do it again. It was in the first week of April I got sent out to the old station. One of the last ones left way out past the northeast fire line. They hadn't used it in over 20 years. No roads went all the way anymore. Closest you could get by vehicle was still 5 miles out, then it was just foot trail. They marked it for demolition this season, said it was a hazard now. Roof was rotting, foundation cracked. My job was to hike out and check for wildlife activity, make sure nothing had made a dent inside, maybe take some pictures for the file before they sent in the crew to level it. I had never been out there. Not to that one. I knew where it was from the old maps, and some of the older rangers had talked about it before, said it was used during the fire seasons in the 80s and 90s. After that, just abandoned. No one maintained the trail anymore. Most people forgot it was even there. The hike out was slow. Trail barely visible under all the deadfall. A few markers left nailed into trees, sun-bleached and crooked. It took me half the day to get there, and by the time I saw the roof through the trees, the light was already shifting. The building sat in a clearing, half sunken on one side, paint peeling off in strips. There was a shed too, collapsed in the back. I stood still for a minute when I got there. Something didn't feel right, though I couldn't say what yet. Then I saw the boot prints on the porch. They were fresh. No moss growing inside the tread, no weathering. Clear shape. Size looked like a man's. I knelt down and touched one. The dirt around it was still soft. The door wasn't locked. I opened it slow, listened first. Nothing. The hinges creaked and the smell hit me next. Not death, not rot. Just old, closed-up air, mixed with something else. Sweat maybe. Smoke. Metal. Inside was dust and shadows. A cot in the corner. Wood stove near the middle. Shelves along one wall, some of the cans still on them. I moved quiet. Didn't turn on my light yet. Windows were enough to see. That's when I noticed the table. It had 2 plates on it. One still had dried food on it, beans maybe, or stew. The other had nothing but a bent fork resting across it. A dirty mug, half full with something dark. Cigarette butts in a glass ashtray, not even cold yet. The smell of the smoke was still hanging in the air. Not old. Recent. Hours maybe. I stood there and listened again. Nothing. But I was sure someone had been there. Maybe still was. I checked the stove. Still warm to the touch. Not burning, but not cold either. There was a log half charred inside. No ashes. Like someone started a fire, then let it die. I walked slow, stepped quiet. Looked into the back room. Bunk broken. Water jug empty. One corner had a pile of wrappers and trash, all newer than they should have been. Some had dates from this year. March. Whoever had been here had stayed a while. There was a logbook on the desk, under a layer of old maps and a cracked radio. Looked like the kind we used to use before everything went digital. Black cover, spiral bound. I picked it up and flipped to the back. The last few pages were torn out. Then I went back farther, and that's when I saw the stains. Dark, thick. Looked brown now, but had once been red. Not ink. Not paint. I didn't need to guess. It was blood. Whole pages written in it. Words smudged, some written fast and hard like the pen or whatever was used kept slipping. I started reading. The entries were short. Some just single lines. He comes at night. Can't leave yet. He's watching the tree line. Heard the breathing again last night. Don't know if I got him or not. Shot twice. Blood on floor. Not mine. The next page was almost all soaked. Couldn't read much. Just one part at the top still clear. He talks like someone I used to know, but I don't think it's him. My hands were shaking. I turned the page and it was blank. The one after that was torn. I backed away from the desk and went for my radio. Static. No signal out this far. I tried again. Nothing. I stepped back toward the front door, then stopped. There was a sound outside. Not close. Just enough to know it was out there. Leaves moving, but not wind. One step, then nothing. Then again. Closer. I didn't go to the window. I just stood near the wall and held my breath. The steps got louder, then stopped completely. I waited for what felt like 10 minutes. No more sound. When I moved again, I took out my knife, stupid as it was. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Nothing was there. Just trees and the clearing. I walked in a wide circle. I didn't see anyone. No animals. Nothing in the brush. Then I saw a second set of prints near the shed. Smaller. Barefoot. I didn't go near them. I backed toward the station, picked up my pack, and left. I didn't check the rest. I just walked fast, then faster once I hit the tree line. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't drink water. I just moved. I made it back to the service road after dark. Called it in. They sent a crew the next morning. I went with them. When we got there, the place was empty. The dishes were gone. Ashtray clean. Logbook missing. No prints on the porch. No blood. Just an old ranger station like it had always been. They said maybe I saw old stuff. Animals. Trick of the light. But I know what I saw. I know what I read. Someone was there. They demolished the station 2 weeks later. Flattened the whole site. Cleared the trail too. Sometimes I still think about those words in the book. He talks like someone I used to know. I don't know why that one sticks the most. Maybe it's because it means whoever wrote it thought there was still hope at first. That whoever they saw out there wasn't a stranger. But they were wrong. And maybe whoever it was is still out there, waiting for someone else to find the station. But now there's nothing left to find. It was supposed to be a routine day, like any other. Just another shift. I was at the ranger station, just outside of town, sorting through a few papers when I heard the crunch of boots on gravel. It was late afternoon, and the sun was already starting to dip behind the ridge. I didn't think much of it at first. People hike in all the time, especially this time of year. But something about the way they came into view made me pause. There were 5 of them. They were walking slowly, but all of them were walking like they were just off. Like they didn't know where they were, or like they weren't really there at all. The first thing that caught my eye was the one holding the axe. It was huge, the kind of thing you'd use for chopping wood or clearing thick brush. But this one was covered in blood. Not a little. A lot. It was dripping, staining the front of his clothes. I thought maybe it was a joke at first, that it was some kind of prank, but then I saw the looks on the other hikers' faces. Blank. No emotion. Their eyes were wide, and they didn't even look at me when they passed through the door. They didn't say a word. They didn't even acknowledge that I was standing there. I don't know what it was that made me feel uneasy. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the blood. But I could feel something in my gut, a sense that something wasn't right. I stood by the door for a moment, just watching them. I tried to get a sense of what had happened, but I couldn't. There was no shouting, no urgency in their movements, just this terrible, quiet stillness. They shuffled toward the corner of the room, and the man with the axe, the one holding it in both hands, leaned it up against the wall. He didn't even glance down at it. It was as though he had no idea what he was holding, or maybe like he had forgotten about it completely. I stepped forward, asking if they were okay. No response. I tried again, this time louder, but still nothing. They were all the same, motionless, their faces drained of color. I started to feel my pulse quicken, like the air in the room was pressing in on me, suffocating me. I asked again, what happened, and for a moment, I thought maybe they would speak. But they didn't. They just stood there, unmoving. One of them, a woman who looked like she was in her late 20s, kept glancing around, her hands twitching at her sides. She seemed the most unsettled of all of them. The others, though men and women alike, were like statues. The man with the axe, though, didn't even move his head. He kept his eyes fixed ahead, staring at nothing in particular. I took a step back and called for help, reaching for the radio on the desk, but before I could say anything, one of them, a tall man with a dirty face, finally spoke. His voice was low, almost inaudible. Don't go up there. It's not safe. He said it like a warning. His words didn't make sense, and I couldn't tell if he was talking to me or just speaking to himself. I opened my mouth to ask what had happened, but I couldn't seem to form the words. All I could do was watch them, standing in the corner of the room like they were trapped in some kind of trance. The man with the axe, his hands now trembling slightly, finally glanced at me just for a moment, but there was something about his eyes that made me freeze. It wasn't fear. It was something darker. Something I couldn't explain. I moved toward the door, hoping to get a better look at them, maybe to see what had happened to them up on the ridge. But before I could reach the door, the woman, her face pale and tight with tension, started to speak. "We didn't mean to," she said, her voice shaking. But then she stopped, like she couldn't find the words. She wiped her hand across her forehead, and it came away streaked with sweat. The silence that followed was unbearable. I wanted to reach out to them, to try and get them to speak, but every step I took toward them felt like I was getting closer to something I shouldn't. Like I was about to uncover something that I wasn't meant to know. I looked at the man with the axe again. Blood was still dripping from the blade, pooling at the base of the handle. It looked fresh, still glistening in the dim light of the station. I don't know why, but I couldn't look away from it. The way it gleamed with a certain awful shine, it wasn't just blood. There was something else in it. Something darker, something that didn't belong. Finally, after what felt like hours, the woman stepped forward. She grabbed the logbook off the counter and flipped through the pages quickly. "It's not safe," she said again, looking over at me, her eyes wide. "He's still out there. He won't stop." She dropped the book onto the desk and backed away, like she was afraid to be near it. She reached for the door, but the others just stood there, frozen. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't trained for this. I wasn't prepared for whatever had happened up there, whatever they had done. They didn't seem like people anymore, not entirely. They seemed like they were. I don't know, like they were haunted, like the terror had gotten inside them and wouldn't let go. I watched them as they turned toward the door. The man with the axe was the last to leave, his head still hanging low, his eyes unfocused. The others moved past me, but they didn't look at me. Not once. I didn't stop them, didn't try to talk to them again. I just stood there, watching them leave, and I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. The door slammed shut behind them, and for a moment, everything was still. I felt a chill crawl down my spine as I stood in the silence of the station, the blood still staining the axe in my mind. The worst part wasn't that they had come in silent and broken. It wasn't the blood. It was that when they left, they didn't look back. Not once. Like they were leaving a part of themselves behind, and they weren't going to talk about what happened. Not to anyone. Not ever. I called it in, finally, but by the time anyone reached the ridge, there was nothing. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No trace of what they'd been through. The only thing that remained was the logbook, pages scattered on the floor, covered in blood. But not theirs. I've been a ranger for almost 6 years. I've done countless backcountry patrols, dealt with poachers, searched for missing hikers, and tracked wildlife in places that make most people uneasy. But I never thought something like this would happen to me, especially not in the middle of the woods, miles from the nearest road. It started on morning shift. The weather was crisp, a little colder than it had been lately, and the sun was just breaking through the tree line as I set out on my usual route. There had been reports of illegal ATV activity in the area, and I was sent to investigate. Nothing new, really. We get ATVs tearing up the trails all the time, and my job was to find out who they were, what they were doing, and send them packing before they made too much of a mess. I followed the tracks for about an hour, heading off trail deeper into the woods, trying to keep my footing as I moved through the thick underbrush. The tracks were fresh. Maybe a day or two old at the most. I wasn't concerned at first. If they were just joyriders, it wouldn't be too hard to find them and send them off with a warning. But the farther I went, the more the feeling that something wasn't right crept up on me. The ATV tracks led to an old logging road that had been overgrown for years. The kind of place nobody would bother with unless they were hiding something. That's when I saw it. The first thing that caught my attention was the smell. It hit me like a wall of chemicals, something harsh, almost sour. I'd spent enough time in the woods to recognize that kind of scent, but I couldn't place it at first. It was too strong to be just some natural odor, and that made me uneasy. I stopped and surveyed the area. The ATV tracks led straight to a narrow clearing, surrounded by thick trees. But what stood out was a series of makeshift structures that had been set up in the middle of it all, tarps, tents, and a few old wooden shacks. I knew right away that I'd stumbled onto something illegal. The thought hit me like a punch to the stomach. There was no way in hell this was a hunting camp. The smell overpowering now was definitely chemical. Not the kind of thing you'd ever find at a legitimate campsite. There were barrels stacked near the structures, some of them leaking a bit, and a few gas cans scattered around. The ground was muddy, tracks everywhere, and it looked like something had been dug up recently. I took a cautious step forward, my heart starting to race. I knew I had to call this in. I could already tell I was looking at some sort of drug operation, maybe meth, but I couldn't risk getting any closer until I had backup. I pulled out my radio and tried to get a signal, but all I got was static. That was the first thing that really set off alarm bells. I was only about 5 miles from the station, and there should have been plenty of reception. But nothing. It was dead out here. The radio didn't even crackle, just silence. I took a few more steps, trying to figure out my next move. I was just about to turn back when I heard it. A sound, just barely audible over the wind, a rustling, like footsteps in the leaves. I froze. My eyes shot around, but I didn't see anyone. The sound stopped as quickly as it started, and I told myself I was being paranoid. I hadn't seen anyone coming in or out of the camp, but it was a huge clearing, and I could be missing something. I crouched low, trying to stay out of sight, but the feeling in my gut just wouldn't go away. I kept moving, slowly, staying behind trees and keeping low. The smell of chemicals was getting stronger, and the ground under my boots was soft, like something had been spilled and seeped into the earth. I was almost to the edge of the clearing when I saw him. A man, standing near the biggest tent, looking straight at me. I couldn't breathe. My first thought was to run, but I knew if I did, I'd be seen. My heart was pounding in my chest. I could feel my hands shaking, but I forced myself to stay still. He didn't move, just stared. For what felt like forever, we locked eyes, and I could tell by the look on his face that he hadn't expected anyone to be here. He wasn't wearing any kind of uniform, just a dirty jacket and jeans, and there was a gun strapped to his waist. Then, without warning, he stepped forward, disappearing behind a pile of barrels. I barely had time to react. I immediately turned and started running, my mind racing. I wasn't trained for this kind of thing. I wasn't prepared to face armed men in the middle of the woods. I had no backup, no radio, and I was out of my depth. I pushed through the underbrush, trying to keep my breathing quiet, but every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, made it feel like they were right behind me. My eyes darted around, but there were no clear paths. I had to keep moving, or they'd catch me. Then, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, fast, coming through the trees. I pushed harder, my legs burning, my heart hammering in my chest. I had no idea where I was going, just running on pure instinct, trying to find something, anything, that could give me an advantage. I needed to get back to the station, to get help. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I could hear voices now, muffled, but there were at least two of them. Maybe more. They were shouting, but I couldn't make out the words. I glanced behind me, but I didn't see them yet. They were close, though. Too close. I saw a thick patch of undergrowth ahead, a place where I could hide, but I didn't stop. I darted into it anyway, hoping the brush would be thick enough to cover me. I pressed myself flat against the ground, holding my breath. I could hear them now, almost right above me, moving slowly, deliberately. They were looking for me. I stayed as still as possible. My legs were cramping, but I didn't dare move. The air felt thick, heavy, as if every breath was a risk. Minutes passed. Maybe more. I had no idea. The sound of their footsteps faded, and I didn't move. Not a muscle. I waited. When it was finally quiet enough, I carefully crawled out of my hiding spot, moving slowly, cautiously. I stayed low, keeping my eyes on the ground, and then I made a break for it. It took what felt like forever, but I finally made it back to the station. I was covered in mud, shaking, and my mind was a blur. I didn't even know if they were still following me. I called in the situation as best as I could, but when backup arrived, the camp was gone. Everything was wiped clean. No sign of the men, no sign of anything. It was like it never existed. I don't know what happened out there. I don't know who those men were or what they were doing in the woods. But I do know one thing. I won't ever forget the feeling of being hunted, of knowing that someone dangerous was just a few steps behind me, ready to do whatever it took to silence me. I don't go out that far anymore. Not unless I'm with someone else. I don't know where to even start with this, but I feel like I have to share what happened, even if I can't make sense of most of it. Maybe it'll help someone, or maybe it'll just be one more thing I can't explain. I've been working as a ranger for a while now, but not long enough to have seen everything, if that makes sense. There are still things out there, things I haven't experienced, and I'd always been curious about what goes on in the deep parts of the forest. That's why I agreed when they asked me to take on the new volunteer, a kid who just finished some basic ranger training and wanted to do a solo patrol to prove themselves. We didn't have many volunteers, and I figured it'd be good for them to get some experience. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, but this time, I was wrong. The kid's name was Ben. He was eager, almost too eager. A little green, you could tell, but he had a fire about him that I didn't mind. He'd been assigned a 4-day solo patrol to monitor the northern trails and check on some of the more remote campsites. No one had really been out that way for a while, and we'd gotten some complaints about people setting up illegal camps in that area. I gave him the usual instructions: check in twice a day by radio, stay in the area, and don't stray too far from the path. He seemed to take it all seriously. The first day, everything seemed fine. I got his check-in around noon, just as scheduled. He sounded fine on the radio, gave his location, and mentioned a couple of minor issues with campfires left behind by hikers. Nothing unusual. But then he didn't check in that evening. At first, I wasn't too worried. A lot of times, things get delayed. Maybe the battery on his radio had died, or he got distracted with something in the woods. But when I didn't hear from him the next morning, I started feeling uneasy. It wasn't like him to go silent for this long. I spent the next few hours trying to reach him over the radio. Nothing. No response. I called his name multiple times, gave him specific instructions on where to check in, even offered help in case he was having trouble with his gear or something. Still nothing. I'll admit, I was getting more anxious by then. I don't like going off gut feelings, but something felt wrong. It had only been a day since his last check-in, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to go after him. So, I suited up, grabbed the pack, and headed out. The area Ben was supposed to be in wasn't too far from the station, but it was rough country. Thick woods, steep ridge lines, places where it's easy to lose your way if you don't know the terrain. I couldn't help but think about what he might have gotten into out there. If he'd hurt himself or gotten lost, it could take a while to find him. I searched the trails where I knew he'd been supposed to be. I checked every spot where I thought he might have stopped, even looked around the campsites he'd been assigned to monitor. There was no sign of him. No broken branches, no footprints, no gear left behind. Nothing. It wasn't until I came across his trail camera that I started to feel truly unsettled. The camera was set up on a tree near one of the campsites he planned to monitor, and at first, I thought it might have just been left behind when he moved on. But as soon as I picked it up, I saw the memory card was missing. It was the only thing I'd found that should have helped. Every ranger who goes out on patrol is supposed to use a trail camera to document what they find along their routes. But there was no footage. No photos. Just the camera and the empty memory card slot. I spent the next 2 days combing through the area, but I couldn't find a single sign of him until the morning of the third day. That's when I found him. It was still early when I spotted him, sitting by a small creek about 2 miles from the original campsite he'd been assigned. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were dirty, his face was pale, and his eyes were wide. He was sitting with his back against a tree, staring into the water like he didn't even notice me approach. I called his name softly at first, but he didn't react. I stepped closer, trying to make sure he was okay, but he still didn't look at me. Finally, I crouched down in front of him. That's when he blinked and looked up, and I saw the fear in his eyes. "Ben, are you all right?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. For a long moment, he just stared at me, like he didn't recognize who I was. Then, slowly, he spoke. "They're watching," he said, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. I didn't know what he meant, but I wasn't about to push him right then. I helped him to his feet, trying to stay calm, but something felt wrong about the way he was acting. He was shaking, sweating, but when I tried to ask him what had happened, he just stared at the ground, his hands clenched tight at his sides. "We need to get back to the station," I told him. But he refused to move. "They're still out there," he mumbled, his voice shaking. They won't stop following me. It was like a switch had flipped. The kid I'd spoken to just days before was gone, replaced by someone who looked like he'd been through hell. I got him back to the station eventually, but the whole time he kept muttering about people watching him. At first, I thought maybe he was just disoriented, maybe had some kind of breakdown from being out there alone for so long. When I finally had him inside and settled, I tried to get more information out of him. He just wouldn't explain what happened out there. Whatever had happened, it had broken him. He refused to talk about it. The only thing he said was, "They're watching. They know I saw them." I didn't press him any further, though. I'd seen enough. I checked the trail camera, and that's when I saw it. There was only one photo on the camera, the only file left on the memory card. It wasn't much, just a blurry image of a man standing among the trees. His face was obscured by the shadows, but his posture, the way he was standing, it didn't look natural. It looked like he was waiting, watching, just beyond the edge of the frame. That was the last straw for me. I didn't know what to make of it, but I could feel the tension in my chest when I saw that photo. Ben had been right about something. He wasn't just paranoid. Someone had been following him, and they didn't want him to get out of those woods alive. Ben still hasn't said anything about what happened out there. He left the station not long after he was found, said he wanted to go home, but I know something happened. It happened last summer, and I still can't fully shake off the feeling of unease that's been with me ever since. I've been a ranger for years, so I'm used to the quiet, the solitude, and the occasional strange situation. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that week. It all started when a camper called in, sounding completely out of breath. He had been camping near the eastern side of the park, a secluded spot, the kind of place you'd have to hike a couple of miles to get to. He wasn't exactly panicked, but he was shaken. He said he had been sitting by his campfire when he noticed someone watching him from the trees. Just standing there, in the shadows, barely visible but enough for him to feel it. At first, I didn't think much of it. People get scared in the woods all the time, especially at night. But then the camper told me the man didn't move. He stayed there, just watching. And when the camper tried to get up and call out, the man disappeared into the trees without making a sound. That got my attention. I told the camper to stay inside his tent, lock up, and I'd come check it out in the morning. I didn't want him wandering around at night in case he was just overreacting to shadows or an animal. I also didn't want to deal with anything too complicated right before dark. Still, I made a note of it and planned on checking the area when I could. I figured if it was an animal or something harmless, I'd just move him to a different spot. The next morning, I packed my gear and headed out to where the camper had been. It was a bit of a hike, and by the time I reached his site, the camper had already packed up and left. I don't blame him for leaving early. He looked visibly shaken when I spoke to him, but he didn't want to stay. He kept saying the whole thing felt wrong, like someone had been lurking around his camp for hours. I told him to stay safe and left it at that. As I walked around his site, I could see signs of his fire, the spot where he pitched his tent, and a few bits of scattered gear. Nothing unusual at first, just the remnants of someone packing up early. But then I noticed something in the dirt near the tree line, footprints. They weren't animal prints, though. They were too big. Too human. And they weren't from a boot like you'd expect from someone who had been out hiking or camping. They were bare feet. Dirty, rough prints that looked like someone had been walking around the site at night. I bent down and examined them, but they were already starting to fade with time. I knew that if someone had been standing in the trees watching him, they must have been right close by, but I couldn't find anything else to confirm it. I checked the surrounding area carefully, trying to see if there were any other signs of someone being out there. Footprints, broken branches, anything, but there was nothing. It was like the person had just disappeared into thin air. I didn't feel good about it. The whole thing felt off. I made a note of the footprints in my report and decided to stay in the area for the rest of the afternoon, just in case the camper had missed something. That night, I went back to my cabin. It was the off-season, so I was alone most nights. It wasn't unusual for me to be by myself out there, and I was used to the quiet. But when I got back, I noticed something strange. My food cache had been tampered with. It wasn't much, just a few cans of beans and some dried food, but it had been clearly opened. Whoever did it didn't take anything, but the bags were torn open, and some of the cans had been moved around. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I never leave food out at night, and I always lock it up tight. There was no way an animal could have done it. This felt intentional. I checked the rest of my cabin. The door was locked. Nothing seemed disturbed inside, but the feeling of unease was growing. Whoever had been out there was getting closer. I locked the door and settled in for the night, but I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I went out to inspect the area around my cabin. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The same footprints I'd seen near the camper were now near my cabin. It wasn't just one or two, there were a few sets of them, scattered around the perimeter. And they weren't just near the food cache. They were all over the place, right up to the edge of my porch, and even a few near the windows. I don't know what made me check the windows, but I did. I pulled the curtain aside, careful not to let anyone see inside. There was nothing, of course. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me while I slept. It was like the feeling from the camper's report, the eerie sensation of being observed. By now, I was starting to feel trapped, like I wasn't alone in the woods anymore. I had no idea who or what was out there, but I couldn't ignore the signs. The footprints. The food cache. The feeling of being watched. I spent the day thinking about what to do. I couldn't just leave without investigating further, but I also knew I was alone out here, and whoever was doing this clearly knew the area well. It wasn't a hiker. It wasn't a lost tourist. This was someone who was familiar with the terrain. Someone who knew how to move around unnoticed. That night, I decided to stay up. I set up a camera outside my cabin, facing the woods. I didn't know if I'd catch anything, but I had to try. It wasn't long after dark when I heard something faint rustling at the edge of the trees. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate. Too careful. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, trying to keep my movements quiet, but when I shone the light into the trees, there was nothing there. Not even a shadow. I waited for a while, listening. Nothing. But I had this sinking feeling in my stomach, the kind you get when you know something's wrong, but you can't see it. Around midnight, I checked the camera. I didn't expect much, but when I looked at the footage, my blood ran cold. The camera had caught something, a man, standing just outside the frame, peering into the woods. It was barely visible, but there. His face was hidden by the trees, and he was barely moving. Just standing there, watching. The worst part? I could tell from the way he was standing that he knew I had the camera. He was aware of it. I don't know how long he had been out there, but I knew that if I didn't leave, things would only escalate. I spent the rest of the night packed up, keeping a lookout. The next morning, I packed up the rest of my things, grabbed my gear, and called into the station. I didn't say much, just that something was off and that I was heading out early. I haven't been back to that part of the woods since. I still don't know who it was, or why they were out there, but I've learned to trust my instincts more now. There's someone or something watching, waiting. And next time, I won't be so naive. It happened about 2 years ago, but I can still feel the cold sweat on the back of my neck every time I think about it. I'm a ranger. Been one for almost 10 years now, and I've seen my fair share of strange things in the woods. But this was different. This wasn't just strange, it was terrifying. I was out on a regular patrol one afternoon, checking on some of the backcountry trails, when I came across something unusual. There had been reports of illegal caving operations happening deep in the park for months, and I had been tasked with keeping an eye on the area. Most people don't realize it, but caves are an incredibly sensitive environment. Not only do they hold delicate ecosystems, but some are sealed off for good reason, like toxic air or unstable structures. And the one I was monitoring had been sealed off for years because of a dangerous buildup of gases. The entrance was hidden well enough in a remote part of the park, and the only way to get there was by foot, following an old, overgrown path. It wasn't easy to find unless you knew exactly where to look. I'd been checking on it for a few weeks, but there hadn't been any signs of activity, no tracks, no discarded gear, nothing. I thought maybe the whole thing had been a rumor. But something about that place didn't sit right with me. It was quiet. Too quiet. That night, I was back at the ranger station, going over some paperwork and listening to the usual quiet of the place. We don't get much traffic during the off-season, so most of my evenings were spent alone, except for the occasional radio check or wildlife report. Around 10 p.m., I got a call over the radio. It wasn't unusual to hear from other rangers, but this one made me sit up straight. It was a man's voice. He sounded desperate, breathless, like he was in some sort of panic. He said he was trapped in the cave system. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. There had been no one in that cave in years, not since the park had sealed it off. The air in there was toxic, no one should have been in there. And if they were, they shouldn't have been able to survive for more than a few minutes. I grabbed the radio. This is Ranger Jennings. Who is this? Can you hear me? There was a long pause, and then I heard him again. He was harder to understand this time, his words slurred, like he was losing strength. I can't get out. Please, trapped. The transmission crackled, and the last part of the message was barely audible. Then silence. I immediately grabbed my gear. I didn't even think twice. I had to get to that cave. I knew the risks, but something in me couldn't just let it go. I had to find out who this was, even though I knew there was no way anyone should have been down there. I tried to call the park office, but the radio was dead, just static. It was strange, but I wasn't going to waste time on it. I started the long hike to the cave entrance. I didn't feel scared, at least not at first. I was used to walking through the woods at night. It wasn't unusual for me to be out there alone. But as I got closer to the cave, that feeling of unease settled in. The woods were darker than usual, the trees thicker, their shadows casting long, eerie shapes in the moonlight. The air felt colder, like something was just waiting for me. When I reached the cave entrance, I couldn't help but feel a chill creep down my spine. The entrance was barely visible, just a dark slit between the rocks. I fumbled with my flashlight, shining it inside. The air smelled damp and stale, and the ground was wet from recent rain. But there was no sign of anyone. No footprints. No sign that anyone had been there recently. I stepped inside cautiously, my flashlight flicking around the walls. I'd been in the cave before, during my initial inspection, but tonight it felt different. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and it was hard to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I called out. Hello? Is anyone there? No answer. Just the echo of my own voice bouncing off the walls. I moved deeper into the cave, my boots slipping on the wet rocks. The only sound was the steady drip of water somewhere in the distance. The further I went, the heavier the air seemed. I kept thinking about the man on the radio. Could it have been a prank? Was it just some random person messing with me? But I couldn't shake the urgency in his voice, the desperation. I finally reached the spot where the cave split into two narrow passages. The layout of the cave was tricky, and the path I was on had led me to the sealed-off section. I knew that beyond this point, the cave had been permanently closed off because of the toxic gases. I turned left, toward the old barrier, and that's when I saw it. On the wall, just above the spot where the ceiling had been, there was a handprint. It wasn't just any handprint. It was fresh. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest. The impression was deep, the outline of fingers still visible, the skin still bright red, like the person had pressed their hand against the cold stone just moments before. I backed up, my head spinning. This wasn't possible. There was no way anyone could have made it past the barrier. The air should have killed them within minutes. I called out again, my voice tight. Who's down there? Answer me. No response. I stood there for a moment, the handprint burned into my mind. It didn't make sense. I was about to turn around and head back to the entrance when something caught my eye. A piece of equipment. Old gear. It was a pack, a sleeping bag, a couple of ropes. All piled up near the wall, abandoned, like someone had left it in a hurry. I bent down to examine the gear. It was covered in dust, as if it had been there for years. But there was no mistaking it, it looked like it had been used recently. I couldn't explain it. The whole situation felt wrong. I had to get out of there. I made my way back toward the entrance, my mind racing. I felt like I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, but every time I turned around, there was nothing. Just darkness. When I finally reached the cave's entrance, I breathed a sigh of relief. But the strange feeling didn't leave. I stepped outside and looked up at the sky, trying to calm my nerves. I couldn't make sense of what I'd just seen. Back at the ranger station, I filed my report. I didn't tell anyone about the handprint, no one would believe me. I still don't know who that man was, or if he was even real. I didn't find anyone else in the cave, and the handprint eventually faded from my memory as just another strange occurrence. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder, what if I wasn't the first to discover that cave? What if someone or something had been there before me? The whole thing still haunts me. Every now and then, when I'm out on patrol, I think I hear someone behind me, breathing softly, just out of reach. I keep looking over my shoulder, but I never see anything. I don't know if I'll ever really know the truth about what happened in that cave. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. But part of me knows there's something in those woods that I'll never fully understand. Something that's been there long before I showed up. It all started one afternoon when I was patrolling the north section of the park. I had been on a quiet stretch of trail, the usual calm of the woods around me, when I saw him. At first, I thought maybe he was part of some reenactment group. They sometimes come through the park, dressed in period military clothing, doing their historical thing. It wasn't the first time I had come across people dressed up like that, so I didn't think much of it at first. He was standing there, just off the trail, in full Civil War era uniform, gray coat, brass buttons, boots, and all. His posture was stiff, military-like, and he had this kind of faraway look on his face, like he was seeing something beyond the trees. At first, I figured he was just lost or perhaps taking a break. I approached him cautiously, thinking I might have to give him a little direction about the park rules. I greeted him. "Hey there. You lost?" He turned to face me. His eyes were wide, intense, but there was something off about him. His expression was serious, even for someone in character. "I'm not lost," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm part of a reenactment group. We're just setting up camp over that way." I glanced in the direction he pointed, but I didn't see anything, no tents, no other people. It was just trees. I thought maybe they were a little further off the trail, but something about him didn't sit right. "Okay," I said, trying to sound casual, "but this area is restricted for camping. You can't stay here. You'll have to pack up and move along." He didn't react immediately. Instead, he just stared at me for a moment before giving a small nod. But then he just turned and walked away from me. No word. No argument. Just walked off into the trees. I stood there, watching him for a moment, and then turned back to the trail. It felt strange. The whole interaction felt like something was off, like the guy had been waiting for me to show up and give him that exact response. Maybe it was nothing, but it stuck with me as I finished my patrol that day. Over the next few days, I came across him again. It wasn't the same place, but it was close. The first time, I had just seen him from a distance, standing in the middle of the trail. He didn't move when he saw me coming. Just stood there, staring at me. The same outfit, the same eerie calm. I slowed down when I approached him. "You again?" I said, trying to hide my discomfort. "You can't just keep wandering around here. It's dangerous." He didn't answer right away. He only gave me that same distant look, like he didn't really hear what I was saying. When he finally spoke, his tone was flat, almost rehearsed. "I'll be gone soon," he said, and then just walked away into the woods again. I don't know why, but I felt something building. I felt like I wasn't just dealing with someone playing dress up in the woods anymore. There was something about the way he spoke, the way he moved, like he didn't belong there at all. The third time I encountered him was the moment everything changed. I was out on a different trail, doing my usual checks, when I saw him again. This time, he was sitting by a small campfire, alone. I approached cautiously, already suspecting something was wrong. "Are you serious?" I said as I got closer. "You're not supposed to be here. I've already told you this. You need to leave the area." He didn't move. Didn't even acknowledge me. Just stared at the fire. It was getting dark by then, and I could barely make out his features in the fading light, but I could tell he wasn't dressed in a way I'd seen any reenactors dress before. The uniform wasn't just old, it was weathered. The fabric was fraying in places. The boots were scuffed up, like they had been worn for years. This wasn't just a guy playing at history. I took a few steps closer. "Hey," I said, more firmly this time. "I'm not asking again. Pack up your stuff, or I'll have to call it in." He didn't flinch. Still didn't look at me. I made the decision to radio it in. The situation was escalating, and I wasn't about to let some guy camp out in the park without permission, especially when he was obviously not following the rules. As I pulled out my radio, I noticed something on the ground next to him, an old, weathered leather bag. Something caught my eye, so I stopped, trying to figure out what it was. It wasn't normal camping gear. It looked like it belonged to someone who had been living in the woods for a long time. I could see food wrappers, a rusty old knife, and a couple of torn maps. As I leaned in to get a better look, I heard him speak again. "Leave it alone." His voice was low and slow, almost too calm, and it sent a cold shiver down my spine. I backed away slowly, and that's when I noticed it. The front of his coat, where it should have had a name or insignia or something to identify it, was just plain. It had no markings, no history. Nothing. I radioed in, telling them to send backup. But when I looked back, he was gone. Disappeared into the woods without a trace. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. The torn-up bag, the worn-out uniform, the way he looked at me like he was watching me from somewhere far away. I knew I wasn't dealing with some harmless reenactor. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something wasn't adding up. The next morning, I went back to the area where I had seen him. There was nothing left at the campfire site. No sign he had ever been there. But as I walked around, something caught my footprints. Fresh ones. They led off into the woods, but the prints weren't from boots like the ones he was wearing. They were different. Barefoot. I followed the tracks for a while, but they just led me in circles, back toward the main trail. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I started checking the records, looking for anyone who might have been in the park that I didn't know about. That's when I found it. I discovered that the man wasn't a reenactor at all. The uniform he was wearing, that old military gear, it was the same style worn by soldiers during a battle that happened right on the edge of the park back in the 1800s. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. The man had been on the run for years. He was a fugitive, wanted for a string of violent crimes that dated back to the late 90s. He had been living off the grid, hiding in plain sight, right under our noses. I spent the next several days searching for him, but I never found him again. The trail went cold. It was like he had vanished. But I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there somewhere, watching the woods. I can't explain what happened, but I know one thing for sure: he wasn't some actor in a historical costume. He was something else. Something far worse. It's hard to explain how I ended up in the situation I did, but I'll try to give it to you straight. I work as a ranger in a relatively quiet part of the park, so when things get quiet, I sometimes forget how easy it is to slip into a routine. When you've been doing the same thing for long enough, you stop thinking that something could actually go wrong. But that day, it all went wrong. It started with the radio call. I was in my cabin, finishing up some paperwork when the emergency line buzzed in. We get a lot of false alarms, people accidentally triggering the system, hikers being a little too dramatic about a twisted ankle, that sort of thing. But this time, it felt different. It was static at first, like someone was trying to come through but couldn't get their signal right. I couldn't make out much of what was said, but I could hear the words "fire tower" in the mess of crackling noise. And then there was a pause. I don't know if it was a mistake or not, but right before the call ended, I heard someone shout, "Please help." My heart sank. I checked the caller ID to see where the signal was coming from. It was from one of the old fire towers. The problem with that was, that tower hadn't been staffed in over a decade. We closed it down after the new fire management systems were put in place. No one had been up there since. I tried calling back, but the line was dead. That's when I knew I had to go check it out. I grabbed my pack and headed out. It wasn't a long hike to the tower, maybe an hour or so, but I had a bad feeling creeping in the back of my mind. It was the kind of feeling you can't explain, the kind that puts your instincts on high alert, even if there's no clear reason to be worried. I tried to brush it off as just nerves. It's a forest. Anything could be making that noise on the other end of the radio. When I reached the base of the fire tower, I noticed something strange. The area around the tower was clear. Too clear. No fallen branches, no signs of wildlife. almost like someone had been tidying up. But there was no reason for anyone to be here, especially if the tower hadn't been in use for so long. The ladder up to the tower was rusty, and the wood creaked under my weight, but it held. I made my way up slowly, my hands stiff around the rungs, my boots scraping against the metal. When I reached the top, the first thing I saw was the door to the tower slightly ajar, which was odd because it was supposed to be locked. I pulled it open cautiously, not knowing what to expect, but what I found inside was worse than I could have imagined. The tower was in a state of disarray, papers scattered across the floor, a chair tipped over, and most unsettling of all, the radio rig. It was turned on. Not just on, but working. Someone had been using it. The dial was set to an emergency frequency, and the static was still faintly buzzing in the background. I couldn't explain it. The rig hadn't been operational in years. The battery should have been dead, the wires long since corroded. And yet, there it was, humming like it was brand new. My stomach twisted. I moved closer to the desk where the logbook was open. At first glance, it looked like any other logbook, pages filled with neat handwriting from previous tower staff. But as I flipped through it, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The dates. They were all wrong. The logbook had been filled out with dates that matched recent wildfires that hadn't even happened yet. I could see it clearly. July 16th, 2023, smoke detected at 22 miles west. Evacuation planned. That entry was dated 2 days before I even saw it. Then the next one, July 17th, 2023, fire escalation confirmed. Weather reports updated. Again, a date that hadn't happened yet. I froze. My mind raced. How was this possible? The fires hadn't even started, and yet the logbook was documenting them. I flipped further through the pages, my hands shaking. Each entry, written in the same neat script, described fires that hadn't occurred, each one described as if they were happening in real time. And then I saw something else, something that made my stomach flip in a way that left me feeling like I was going to fall right through the floor of the tower. The last entry in the logbook read, August 2nd, 2023, all systems have been activated. Tower fully operational. Preparing for final report. That last line didn't make sense. The tower hadn't been operational for over a decade. No one had been here. No one had been maintaining anything. It was as if someone had been living in the tower, maintaining the equipment, keeping everything running. I looked back at the radio and tried to make sense of it all. My hand hovered over the buttons, unsure of what to do. Should I call it in? Should I get back to the station and report this? But then, before I could make a decision, I heard a noise from below, the creak of the ladder. My heart jumped into my throat. Someone was up here with me. I rushed to the door and looked down, but all I could see was the empty clearing around the base of the tower. No one was there. My eyes darted back to the radio, but there was no sound now. Nothing but silence. I don't know how much time passed, but after a few minutes, I made my way back down the ladder. Every instinct told me to get out, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still up there, watching me, waiting. I quickly radioed in a request for a team to come up to the tower, but the signal was too weak. There was no way I was getting through. I'd have to go back to the station for help. As I made my way back down the trail, I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. The woods around me felt off, like something was moving in the shadows. I didn't look back until I was well away from the tower. By the time I made it to my cabin, my nerves were shot. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I sent a team to check out the fire tower. They reported back with nothing. No sign of anyone being there. No logbook, no equipment, no radio. Everything was gone. I still don't know what happened that day. I don't know who had been in that tower, or how they knew about fires before they happened, but I'll never forget the feeling of standing there in that empty tower, knowing something was terribly wrong. I haven't been back to that fire tower since. I've asked around, but no one has any answers. And every now and then, when the radio crackles to life in the station, I wonder if it's the same person reaching out again. Maybe next time, they won't be so silent. I was on patrol one morning when the fog rolled in. It was thick, so thick I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The visibility was awful, and the air was heavy, damp with the kind of cold that chills you straight to the bone. I'd been in the forest long enough to know that this kind of weather could make the day feel off, and I'd learned to be extra careful when it got like this. I was about 3 miles from the nearest trailhead, just checking the boundaries of the park like I usually did, when I came across a man. He was standing there, near a cluster of trees, looking like he was trying to peer through the fog. At first, I thought he was just a hiker, maybe lost or looking for his way back. But then I noticed how he was acting real jittery, pacing a little. It didn't sit right with me, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I approached him cautiously. "Hey, you all right?" I called out. He turned to me quickly, like he didn't expect anyone to be around. His face was pale, sweat dripping from his forehead, his clothes all wrinkled like he'd been out there a while. I've dealt with a lot of hikers over the years, so I knew how to read people. This guy was on edge. I'm looking for my son," he said. His voice shook a little, but it didn't sound like he was in distress. More like uncomfortable. "Your son?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. I've heard a lot of people say stuff like this before, and usually, it's just a case of someone being lost, or too far from the trailhead. "Yeah," he said, looking over his shoulder. "He ran off, and I can't find him. We were hiking, and I turned around and he was gone. He should be right here. He's just a kid, not even 10. I looked around, but all I could see was fog and trees. The guy was visibly anxious now, glancing every which way, like he expected to see something any second. I don't know why, but something about the way he was acting felt wrong. I figured he'd gotten turned around, or maybe his kid had wandered off a little too far. "I can help you look for him," I said, trying to be helpful. He nodded quickly, then added, "We should split up. I'll take the east side of the trail. You go west. It's just thick out here, and he could be anywhere." I wasn't thrilled about splitting up, but I didn't want to argue with him. I told him to keep an eye out and we'd meet back at the spot where we were, but something still didn't sit right with me. We went our separate ways. I checked my radio to make sure it was working properly, then started scanning the area. The fog made it impossible to see much of anything. I called out a few times, but nothing. There was no sign of the kid, not even a footprint. I spent the next 20 minutes or so checking around, walking carefully through the trees, trying to avoid tripping over roots. I called out for the kid a few more times, but the fog swallowed up my voice before it could go too far. Nothing. I started to get the feeling like I was being watched. Every so often, I hear something behind me, but when I turned around, there'd be nothing. I didn't want to spook myself, but it was hard not to feel uneasy out there alone with the fog pressing in from all sides. Then I found something. It was a backpack, half hidden under a fallen log. The straps were tangled, and it didn't look like it had been there for very long. I bent down to inspect it, thinking maybe it belonged to the kid, or at least someone who had wandered off. It didn't seem like it had been abandoned for long. When I unzipped it, my stomach dropped. Inside, I found a few things that weren't exactly kid-friendly. A couple of rolls of duct tape, a bag of zip ties, and a small bottle of something. I picked it up, trying to read the label in the poor light. It was chloroform. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I stood there for a moment, just holding the backpack, trying to piece it together. There was no way a child had brought this out here. And even if he had, I couldn't understand why he'd have something like this. I scanned the area around me again. No sign of anyone. No sign of a man either. That gut feeling from before was back, and it hit me harder than ever. My mind was racing, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I needed to get back to where we had agreed to meet. I retraced my steps, keeping the backpack with me. Every crack of a branch made me jump. My heart was pounding, and I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone coming out of the fog. But there was no one. When I got back to the spot we had agreed to meet, I waited for what felt like forever. There was no sign of him. I called out his name, but nothing. No answer. I radioed in, but the fog made the signal spotty. I decided to go back to the trailhead and report what I'd found. As I turned to leave, I heard something, footsteps crunching in the distance, slow and deliberate. I froze. I waited for a few seconds, straining to hear. The steps grew closer. I couldn't make out who it was, but I knew it wasn't the guy I'd been talking to earlier. This was someone else, and they were coming straight toward me. I decided to move fast. I turned and made my way back toward the station, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The fog seemed even thicker now, like it was trying to close in around me. Every so often, I hear the crunching of footsteps, but when I looked back, I saw nothing. I had to get out of there. Eventually, I made it back to the main trail, where the fog wasn't as thick. My heart was still racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was behind me. I looked over my shoulder one last time, but again, nothing. When I got back to the ranger station, I handed the backpack over to my supervisor. They didn't need to ask questions. They'd seen enough weird stuff in their time. They called in a search team to go look for the guy, but they never found him. No sign of the man or the kid. I don't know what that guy was doing out there, or why he had the stuff he did. But I do know one thing for sure. When you get that feeling in your gut, you're better off trusting it. Because out there in the fog, something wasn't right. And I don't ever want to be in that situation again. It was late spring, and the weather had been a mix of sunny and rainy all week. Perfect for a hike, really. I'd been working as a park ranger for almost a year at the time, so I was used to the quiet stretches of woods, the thick canopy, and the occasional distant shout from a hiker or camper. Mostly, it was peaceful. But not this time. It started with the reports. It wasn't anything too strange at first. A couple of hikers said they heard something coming from the culvert that runs under the service road. They described it as screaming, but I didn't think much of it. The place had a creepy vibe, sure. It was remote, the road wasn't well maintained, and the pipe was long, dark, and narrow, probably home to all sorts of small critters. I didn't think it'd be worth investigating at first. People hear weird things in the woods, you know? The next day, another pair of hikers called it in. They said they were sure they heard someone screaming from under the road again, and it was the kind of scream you don't forget. But it wasn't the same scream they'd heard the day before. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were just exaggerating, maybe even trying to stir up some drama for their Instagram or whatever. But after the second report, I decided to take a look. It wasn't like I had anything pressing to do. I grabbed my flashlight and a couple of basic tools just in case, and made my way to the service road. It wasn't the most scenic part of the park, mostly just a long, winding stretch of dirt road that barely anyone ever used. The culvert was right next to a big metal pipe, about 8 feet across, with a rusted grate on either end. I knew it was an old drainage system, one that had probably been there since the 50s. When I got there, it was quiet. Too quiet. The birds weren't chirping, no wind, nothing. I had this weird, crawling feeling in the back of my neck, but I tried to shake it off. I checked the area around the culvert first. No obvious signs of anything being out of place. There were some animal tracks, but they were nothing unusual for this time of year. A few deer, a fox maybe. No sign of human activity. Then, I crouched down to check the grate. It wasn't locked or anything, just old and kind of bent from years of disrepair. I moved it aside and pointed my flashlight down into the pipe. It was pitch black, the kind of darkness that felt like it was swallowing the light whole. I peered inside, but all I could see were the shadows of the twisted metal walls. That's when I noticed it. A sound. Soft, but distinct. A scratching noise, like something or someone was dragging along the metal. I froze, listening, trying to make sense of it. It didn't make sense. The pipe was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, and no animal would make that kind of sound. The scraping continued for a few seconds, then stopped. I called out. "Hello? Anyone down there?" Nothing. I started to feel stupid. I mean, it was probably just an animal, right? I turned to leave, but then I heard it again, a thud this time, louder than the scratching. I immediately felt my stomach drop. Something about it sounded human. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I pulled my flashlight back out and shone it further down the pipe. That's when I saw something that made my heart race. There were marks. Scratches, deep gouges, like someone had been trying to claw their way out of the pipe. The metal was bent in places, like someone had been kicking at it. At that point, I should have called for backup, but I didn't. I was just trying to make sense of it all, to not freak out. I crouched lower and moved closer to the pipe, feeling an irrational need to know what was going on. That's when I saw something else. A phone. It was lying just inside the pipe, right near the opening, half buried in the dirt and debris. The screen was cracked, but I could still see it was playing a video. I don't know why I looked at it. Maybe I thought I'd find a clue. Maybe I was just curious. I pressed play. The video was grainy, shaky, and the audio was muffled. At first, it just showed darkness, but then there was movement. A hand reaching into the frame, dragging someone into the pipe. A body, limp and dangling. The person's face was hidden, but they were clearly struggling, kicking their legs. Their hands were outstretched as if they were trying to grab something, anything, to stop being pulled. I couldn't breathe for a second. My hands were shaking, and I had to force myself to look away from the screen. But when I did, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The scratching noise started up again. But this time, it wasn't just from inside the pipe. It was coming from somewhere else, behind me, off in the woods, just out of sight. My heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to run, but I couldn't move. I was stuck, frozen in place. I listened closely, my ears straining for any sound. That's when I heard a voice. Low, soft, almost a whisper. It was coming from somewhere nearby. Help. It was muffled, like it was coming from inside the pipe again. But no one could be down there. Right? I stood up, my legs weak beneath me. The phone was still playing, but I couldn't bring myself to watch the rest. My hand trembled as I shoved it into my pocket, trying to make sense of everything. My mind was racing. I needed to get out of there. I needed to find help. I turned, ready to go, but before I could take a step, I heard it. Footsteps. Someone was walking towards me through the woods, moving slow and deliberate. The sound was unmistakable, like someone dragging their feet across the dirt. I couldn't see them. I couldn't see anything beyond the trees. But I could hear them coming closer. I don't know how I managed it, but I somehow forced myself to move. I didn't care about being quiet or discreet. I just ran. I didn't even look back. I just ran as fast as I could. My heart was in my throat, and my breath was coming in ragged gasps, but I didn't stop. When I reached the service road, I finally turned to look behind me. There was nothing. The woods were silent again. No one was there. But I didn't stay. I hopped in my truck and drove straight to the ranger station, not slowing down for a second. I told my supervisor everything when I got back, but he didn't seem to take it seriously. I showed him the phone, the video, and the marks on the pipe. He didn't say much, but I could tell he was uneasy. We both knew that there was something wrong out there, but we didn't have the resources to investigate it any further. He said they'd send someone to check it out, but I knew better. I knew I wouldn't go back out there again. Not alone. Not ever. I don't know who was out there, or what happened to the person in the video. But I do know this, I'll never be able to unsee it. And I'll never forget the sound of those footsteps. They were too real. Too close. I've been working as a park ranger for about 3 years, mostly doing patrols and the usual maintenance stuff around the trails. Most days are pretty uneventful, walking the same routes, checking trail signs, making sure no one's doing anything they shouldn't. But a few months ago, something started happening that made me question everything I thought I knew about the job. It started small, like a few hikers getting lost on the same trail. They'd follow the markers, and somehow, they'd end up way off track. Not just a little off track, like they'd end up miles away from where they were supposed to be. Some of them would even end up near dangerous cliffs or bogs where they could have easily gotten hurt. I thought maybe it was just a few confused hikers, but then it kept happening. Over and over. At first, I didn't think much of it. But when it started happening on different trails, I started to get suspicious. I'd go out to check the trail markers myself, and everything looked fine. No broken signs, no obvious signs of vandalism. The markers were in place, just like they should be. But something was off. It was like the people getting lost were following the signs to places they shouldn't be, even when I couldn't see what was wrong with the markers. After a week of this, I got a call from one of the other rangers about a hiker who'd gotten seriously lost. This one was particularly bad. He'd wandered off the trail at night and ended up in a part of the park where he couldn't find his way back. He had to be rescued, and when they got him out, he mentioned something that really set off alarm bells for me. He said he'd seen someone, a figure in the distance, moving around the trail markers. He couldn't tell who it was, but it looked like they were messing with the signs. That's when I decided I had to do something about it. At first, I thought maybe it was just someone messing around. But after hearing about the lost hiker, I realized this was getting serious. So, I started setting up some motion cameras along the more remote trails, places where hikers had gotten lost recently. I wanted to see if I could catch someone in the act of messing with the markers. The first few days were quiet. The cameras didn't pick up anything out of the ordinary. But on the fourth night, something happened. It was late, around 2 a.m., and the motion sensors went off. I wasn't expecting much, honestly. I thought maybe an animal had triggered it. I had to drive out to the site, but when I checked the footage, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was a person, a figure, walking down the trail. They were wearing dark clothes and a mask, something like a full-face ski mask, covering all of their features. They moved slow, almost like they were deliberately trying to stay hidden. The person was carrying something, but it was hard to tell what at first. As they got closer to the trail marker, I could see they had a set of tools, pliers, a small hammer, a wrench. They were changing the trail marker. I couldn't believe it. They weren't just moving the marker a little bit. They were taking the whole thing down and replacing it with something else, something that looked like it had been made by hand. The marker they were putting up wasn't official at all. It was something crude, like a hastily carved piece of wood with some kind of symbol on it. I'd never seen anything like it in all my years on the job. The person didn't seem to be in a hurry. They took their time, working like they knew exactly what they were doing. They'd glance around every now and then, like they were making sure no one was watching, but it was like they knew they were alone out there. After a few minutes, they finished, stepped back, and just stared at the marker for a while. Then, they turned and walked off into the woods, disappearing into the dark. I don't know how long I just sat there, staring at the footage. My mind was racing. This was no random prank. Whoever was doing this was intentionally messing with the trail markers, leading people into dangerous parts of the park. I wasn't sure why, but I knew I needed to stop them before someone got hurt. I decided to take a risk. The next night, I set up a second sting. I wasn't just going to catch the person, I was going to confront them. I made sure to set up the cameras in more spots, so I could get a good view of the area where the trail markers were getting swapped out. I grabbed some backup gear, including a walkie-talkie, just in case. I sat in my truck for hours, waiting. I kept going over everything in my head, wondering who could be behind this. Was it someone with a personal vendetta? Someone trying to cause harm for no reason? I had no idea, but I was going to find out. Around 1:30 a.m., the motion sensors on the cameras lit up again. I checked the live feed on my phone. There they were, the same figure from before, walking down the trail, same dark clothes, same mask. This time, I had my heart in my throat. I'd been expecting it, but now that it was happening again, it felt different. More real. I was already in position, hiding just off the trail, maybe 50 yards away. I waited, watching through the trees, as they reached the trail marker. Just like before, they started pulling out their tools. I could hear them working, but I didn't dare move. I kept my eyes on them, waiting for the right moment. Then, something changed. The person stopped what they were doing. I couldn't tell if they had heard something or if they were just taking a break, but they looked around, scanning the trees. For a moment, I thought they might have noticed the cameras, but then, they went right back to work, replacing the marker like they hadn't skipped a beat. It was then I realized just how close I was to them, closer than I should have been. My stomach dropped, and I felt my pulse race. I needed to move, but I was frozen, stuck to the spot. I couldn't take my eyes off them. After what felt like forever, the person finished their work and started walking back down the trail, just like the last time. As they passed by me, I held my breath, praying they wouldn't hear me. I could barely see their face through the mask, but there was something unsettling about the way they moved. It was deliberate, like they were doing this for a reason, like they knew exactly what they were doing and why. When they were finally out of sight, I didn't wait. I got up, got in my truck, and followed them. I couldn't just let them walk away, not after what I'd seen. I stayed a few hundred yards behind, keeping my distance, trying to stay out of sight. The person led me deep into the park, further than I'd ever gone on foot. After about 10 minutes, they stopped. They stood there for a moment, looking around, and then they disappeared into the trees. I parked my truck and got out, walking cautiously toward where I last saw them. It was quiet. Too quiet. I kept going, but by the time I got close to where they'd gone, I couldn't find any trace of them. No footprints, no signs of where they'd gone. I searched for hours, but they were gone. I called in the authorities, but by then, there was no sign of the person or the markers they'd been switching. The next day, I took down all the footage and reported it. They couldn't track the person down, though. Whoever it was, they knew the park too well, and they were careful. I still don't know who they were, or why they were doing it. But the park's been quieter since. No more hikers getting lost. And I haven't seen anyone messing with the markers since. But I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, watching.